What scares me more than anything are mass manipulations.
I think there are very few people that are truly aware of the damage that is being created.
We are in danger of having a generation of people who just live for the moment, have a short attention span, don't really think about things through in terms of consequences, aren't informed by a particularly rich set of experiences in the past.
How do you see this playing out?
Baroness Susan Greenfield is one of the world's most provocative neuroscientists, exploring how our brains shape who we are and what constant screen time may be doing to them. From consciousness to so-called brain rot, she questions how the digital age is reshaping attention, identity, and the human mind.
Susan.
Hi, Julian.
Why should someone tune in and listen to our episode today?
Because what we're going to talk about is the brain. And the brain interests everyone because everyone has a brain.
I love that. And you have studied a lot of things around cognition and brain health, but in recent years, you've looked at the effect of technology on the brain and brain rot. Where do you stand right now on... You're laughing at...
Well, I wouldn't use the term brain rot as such, but
okay.
I suppose in one sense it is like that, yeah. Yeah.
What are your findings showing?
Okay, well, it's not just my findings. It's been now 10, 20 years since this debate's been ongoing. So 2 seconds on the fastest ever course on how the brain works. So you have to bear with me. So the brilliant thing about being born a human being is that we superlatively adapt to the environment, unlike, say, a goldfish. So as you get more sophisticated, so you shift away from instinct and genetic tyranny to actually adapting to your environment. And we human beings occupy more ecological niches than any other species on the planet. We don't run fast, we don't see particularly well, we're not strong compared to other animals. But what we do fantastically is we adapt to the environment because our brains are capable of something called plasticity, from the Greek plastikos, to be moulded. Doesn't mean the brain's made of plastic. And because of this, it means we can adapt to any environment. And we, every moment you're alive, are adapting to experiences. It follows, therefore, if your environment is a two-dimensional one, with only 2 of your senses being stimulated, hearing and vision, it might be that your thoughts and feelings, the way you see the world, are different from previous generations who lived in 3 dimensions and had 5 senses stimulated. So what one's finding are, by the normal yardsticks of what we would like and how people talk with each other, how confident they are, that those things now are in jeopardy.
So what you're saying again is that the 2D, the digital world, is drastically changing how our brain is forming.
Well, I think now the evidence is overwhelming, and the fact that we have the bills and so on, and legislation and attempts to try and constrain what young people especially, how they have access to screens. The other thing about sitting in front of a screen all the time is every hour you're doing that, it's 1 hour less giving someone a hug or going for a run or going and smelling flowers. Because for all of us, there's only 24 hours in the day, which means if some of those hours are spent doing one thing, they can't be spent doing something else.
That's how you grew up.
Yeah.
And now we are in a world where we are in 2D facing a screen.
Sure.
What I'm struggling with right now is that I think there are very few people that are truly aware of the damage that is being created.
Well, you say damage, and I'm trying to escape value judgments here.
Okay.
It depends what you want. Yeah. If I could say to you, if you had kids, or if I could say, well, what do you want them to be? What kind of people do you want them to be? What kind of talents do you want them to have? What particular qualities do you want to emphasize? And until we address those questions and frame a sort of profile of what we'd like, then it's very hard to deliver that. But for the moment, let's just say that we would put a premium on people being able to look people in the eye, as we're now doing, people who are empathetic to others, and people who are resilient, who are used to the happenstances of the external world rather than the closed world of the tribe, of the silo that you might be in on social media. If you want those things, then I'm afraid you have to get out there in the real world. And for me, that's what being a human being is all about. And also, and perhaps we'll get onto this later, it's about spirituality, being able to sit calmly by a lake or a mountain, even if you don't believe in God, and feel there's more to things than just owning a pair of trainers that you want. Yeah? And I think the problem is that if you are always in front of a screen, someone's done a really interesting study actually of showing that if you are interacting with small models as opposed to the same model but on a larger scale, your perception of time is different, which is interesting. So if you're engaging with the small model, time goes faster, whereas with the larger model, time goes slower. So I think that's why we like sitting by lakes and mountains, because time slows down, things are calmer. Yeah, we always like being in places that are bigger than us, whether it's a patient worship or somewhere in the country. And I think if you are constantly like this on a screen, then perhaps you're risking something. The other thing that I think you're risking is your imagination. Do you remember as a kid, you'd say, and I hope you're of similar, so you were born in the last century, I hope, yeah? So
Yeah.
I
think then, yes, definitely.
Yeah. So do you remember as a kid, you'd say, let's make up a game. Let's make up, and this is going to be the aircraft, and this is what you're holding there. That's the magic, and you'd make up a game out of very minimal props or boxes traditionally. Yeah? And I think that was actually rehearsing a little life story that you were driving when you're making up a game. The narrative is coming from you, not from some web designer. Yeah. So you're making up an internalized story. You're developing a little identity, a little life story. And those things, I think, equip you well for life afterwards, because it gives you an inner world that's yours, that you don't share, you don't download, it's yours. That's your narrative, that's your identity. Yeah. And I think if you are constantly addicted to downloading everything and sharing everything and waiting for feedback from your so-called friends, like some Greek chorus, I think that perhaps you do have more problems with your identity, with your confidence, and hence with your mental health, which is, of course, one of the big scourges of life today. Yeah.
A few things I'm hearing. We are losing out on curiosity, on awe, and also creativity.
Sure.
And I remember, again, I was one of those. I was telling you, I went to choir school when I was 8 years old, and would just sit there at night, closing my eyes and just imagining the craziest stories of Lord of the Rings-esque, mixed with Star Wars and all these amazing battles that I was inventing. And how often do I do that now, especially when I'm scrolling before I go to bed?
You only have to sit on the train. How many people are not on laptops or mobiles? How many people are actually looking out the window or just daydreaming, which I think is a very valuable thing to do, where you just let your mind float free, or actually talking to each other in a nice, interactive, friendly, social way. It's very rare.
And I think also to caveat that and saying that no one is at a fault here, as in the individual, because these devices are so utterly addictive.
Well, they're designed to be addictive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit like in the old days with smoking. If you have people enjoying doing something and some people making money out of them, that's a very hard nut to crack. You're going to find that you'll get a lot of opposition if people are having fun. Yeah, it's a bit like smoking, or fur coats was another one. But you can change it. You can change the culture.
You saw, I'm assuming, smoking and other kind of habits not come up, but you saw them come down and be further regulated. Do you see social media as akin to something like cigarettes?
Well, I see it as something that requires a cultural shift. Yeah. Now, that's a very slippery thing to define. But if you think about it, smoking isn't illegal. Wearing a fur coat in the UK isn't illegal. But when did you last see a woman in a real fur coat? Probably never. Not, I'm using that as an example because it's the cultural pressure not to do that. And the smoking similarly. Although it's discouraged, still very few people now smoke as opposed to in my parents' day. I remember my parents' house, there'd be boxes of cigarettes on the table, and like packets of crisps or something, you'd help.
But also the taboo around smoking. I used to smoke briefly when I was younger because it was the cool thing, right? And luckily now it's not a cool thing to do. But there isn't really a taboo per se of using social media. Actually, the complete opposite. If you're not on social media, there's still a bit of a taboo.
There's a certain taboo. Although there is a revolution in a sense of the slow food movement and vinyl records. Yeah, and apparently old tech is now valuable. Old typewriters and old calculators, and there's certain nostalgia. And I think and we'll get on to AI, I'm sure, in a minute, as people become increasingly tsunamied and overwhelmed by AI, I think there might be a nostalgia for a time when you were more in control and when the truth was clearer than it is now. And reality was clearly more obvious than it is now. And it might be that the backlash comes with that when people feel completely, cast adrift in this AI fakery. They don't know quite what to do.
We have just launched the Beyond Tomorrow community, and I would love for you to be a part of it. Think masterminds with some of your favorite podcast guests, dinners and events in your city, accountability groups, free giveaways, and a space to have all your questions answered. And what's best? It's all for free. Just check out the link in the description below or head to school.com/beyond-tomorrow. That's skool.com/beyond-tomorrow.
I sometimes joke around and saying that all these industries that do have positive, but also breed a lot of negativity, then create their own sub-industry. As an example, the wellness space or the biohacking space is growing very fast as an antidote. An antidote to what's going on. So, but I do want to quickly mention a few studies. One more recently that was named Feeds, Feelings and Focus. And according to this study, heavy short-form video consumption is linked to diminished cognitive function. We already knew that. But it also is associated with social isolation, lower life satisfaction, poorer sleep, increased anxiety, and loneliness.
Are we surprised?
Yeah, but it's also like, and this was a study by Nguyen from this year. So more and more studies with larger data sets, some longitudinal studies are coming to market, coming into the public eye. The question is, how much data and studies do we need for something to happen?
So here one bumps up against a real problem, which is how you design an appropriate experiment, what the experiment will be.
Yeah.
Okay, so normally you'd have to have a hypothesis. I believe social media is bad for X, Y, or Z. Then you'd have to have a control group that are different from your experimental group. And that's very hard to do with human beings. And it's also very hard to design what is the hypothesis. I mean, for me, the interesting things would be how imaginative are people, like you just said, or how kind are they, or how resilient are they to the problems of life. Now, how are you going to design something that tests whether A has it and B doesn't? So you can do mechanical things and you can do, reading skills or cognitive things, but you'd have to give some kind of test. But I think it goes deeper than that. I think what we're interested in is what the people are like, and you don't have a simple test for what kind of person are you, in one sense. I know there's all these psychology tests like Myers-Briggs and so on, but I'm thinking about things that I care about, which is how happy someone is, why are young people killing themselves, why are they isolating themselves in their room. Now, how do you test or prove that, linking it to the screen? Yeah,
I love that because something you're bringing up is like, what do we see as a role model or a human being that one respects as a member of society? And so it's actually trying to come to terms with what society wants as well.
So if you think about people you might admire, let's take some examples: Mozart, Einstein, Shakespeare. Let's just take some obvious, clear examples. Now, their skills weren't quantitative. It wasn't that they had better memories and they weren't faster at doing things. They were unique individuals. That's the whole point. It was their uniqueness that we applaud. Yeah, it's their uniqueness that makes them special. Their authenticity. It's not that they were better than someone at doing something else. And I think that this emphasis on quantitative things, which is doing something better, faster, or whatever, that's wrong. It should be a qualitative thing. And also, I'd like to just reflect on people have all this time they're saving. So what are they doing with the time? Why would you want to save a lot of time? What are you going to do? And until you actually add on with the time-saving thing what you're also going to do, then I think, again, I'm very concerned by the rise in mental illness, especially among young, because it's such a waste of young brains and talent and energy. And they're going to be looking after us when we have our Zimmer frames. So we have a self-interest that they are a little bit more kind of integrated to the real world. Yeah.
I just want to make one small point on the role of the Industrial Revolution on education and capitalism and all that, and in being one of the reasons why we have less space to feel into that authenticity and creativity. Do you think in part that was the first kind of step towards?
I think people have often said to me in discussions such as this. Oh, well, there was always people like you that were against the printing press, or they were against the Industrial Revolution, they were against the car, and this is just the latest thing, and you should really go and join the Amish, or, something like that. And I think the difference was that the printing press, the car, the Industrial Revolution, refrigerators, all those things have enhanced real life. They've enhanced life in 3 dimensions. They've made it more interesting, more comfortable, more safe, more healthy, whatever. But the cyber world has offered an alternative world. It hasn't made the current world a better place to live in. It's offered an alternative to the current world. So you can go shopping, you can go dating, you can play games, all without meeting another human being. And I think that that's the difference, that the impact of the screen technologies and the latest version, AI, which we can come on to, those things offer an alternative to real life as opposed to enhancing real life.
Yeah. AI. But first,
yeah.
You mentioned this human being, and I think we can agree that someone who is kind, empathetic, respectful, curious.
Yeah. Resilient, I think, is another very important thing.
Resilient.
Yeah.
This is a question to the parents listening. How does one go about parenting a child in an era when one needs to be connected through social media, through their laptop in some ways, but also connected in the real world? How do you find that balance?
Okay, it depends how much they need to be. I mean, there's some schools, the Waldorf schools, that ban all social media. And I gather in Silicon Valley this is very popular. So it's not an automatic given that you have to be. But obviously you need rudimentary IT skills, of course you do. But you need other skills as well, like fine motor skills, which are now diminishing, like being able to skip and hop, which kids can't do so easily now because they're so very basic motor skills and movement skills and manual dexterity. I think I'd like to see those as well. I think the main thing is, of course, to have a balance. And that depends very much on what kind of person you want your kid to be, what kind of family you are, your income, and many, many things. But I think there's three important things that should be retained. Yeah, one is reading from books. Yeah, and especially if the child's small, you can read the child a bedtime story while cuddling them, because that trains the child, because they won't have the reading skills to use their imagination. I remember when I was very small, our kindergarten teacher used to read the stories about this wicked Russian witch called Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga used to eat the heads off children. She had metal teeth, and she lived in a compound with skulls around it, and the house moved around on chicken legs, and the whole thing was perhaps children aren't taught it nowadays. It's probably considered, for the current generation, perhaps considered too hard. But I still remember those stories. I remember sitting at my little desk when I was about 6, hearing about Baba Yaga. And that was much more powerful than seeing a movie, I think. It was just, you're listening and using your imagination. And I think if you can cuddle a child as they're going to sleep and read them a story, that is the most special thing. And that gets them into a longer attention span. It gets them to actually use imagination. And, of course, it gets them interested in reading books eventually, where I think I have a firm belief that reading echoes thought, because it's very structured. You have beginning, middle, and end, just like a thought has a beginning, middle, and end. So reading books to kids, not Kindle, because it's been shown that the sense of touch gives an extra power to what you're doing. Eating together, again, everyone used to do that in the old days, but now with hurried families, and it might be more of a challenge. But eating together, we know eating together, companion with bread, compañeros with bread, companion with bread. Traditionally, human beings, ever since we stalked the planet, have eaten together, and I think, and for much more than just getting calories, And I think that has a certain cadence, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's a ritual end to the day. And so I think eating together, of course, without mobiles on there. And the third thing, obvious one, is exercise, physical exercise, because you can't be on your phone if you're running. Yeah. So you can't be dialing things. And we know that enhances neurogenesis, the growth of neurons. And even in older adults, it's shown that young people that exercise are much more cognitively proficient than those that don't. And in children, it's also correlated with better literary and mathematical skills, the kids that are physically exercising. And with this body mass index and the worry about obesity nowadays, again, it's obvious that is a good thing to do. It just makes you feel good. I mean, I mentioned I personally run, and afterwards it doesn't make the problems go away, but you feel you can cope with them. You feel you're on top of them. Yeah. So physical exercise, which is good on ticks every box, reading and eating together. Now, it's sad that I flag those three things because up until quite recently, this is what everyone did anyway.
Yeah.
But sadly now those things I think are in peril, and they're very important to us to do.
It's funny how things have changed so fast. Even when you mentioned the Amish.
Yeah.
Recently, the Amish have been revered as this group of people that are, connected with the land.
And the pure
exactly,
yeah.
and living very long because they're
modest and
touching the ground and germs and everything, and high immune system and all that.
Yeah.
And it's happened very recently, I feel. We are moving, the world is moving faster than... There's a great phrase by Peter Diamandis, which says that technology moves much faster than society and institutions.
That's a good thought, yeah.
And so,
well, not a good thought. I mean, it's a correct thought.
And so, but wisdom is needed. He quotes. According to you, Susan, how do we touch into that wisdom as a society right now?
Well, using technology or because of technology?
Dealing with the fact that we are at the beginning of the AI.
Okay, well, let me ask you. Rather like I asked about children, if you ruled the world, right, you had complete power, Julian, tell me what a good society would look like. Give me a thumbnail sketch of the ideal society.
Well, I talk about this
of
a lot
utopia,
with my mission, because part of it is related to that. But I would say a world of human flourishing. And what does human flourishing look like to me? It's one where we have a high degree of compassion for one another, where there's resiliency, where there's all the things we mentioned before.
Okay, so how do you think one would create an environment, given you've now learned about the plasticity of the brain, right? Okay, so our next job is we've got to imagine an environment that encourages those qualities. So
education is
education is the key thing. And I think... And especially when you're young, when your brain is so vulnerable, as we know from James Joyce, Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, or the Jesuits who used to say, "Give me a child till he is 7, and I will give you the man." Jesuits used to say, We're Catholic. On Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce, which is all about how easy it is to indoctrinate a young brain, and so on, because you don't have the sales resistance, you just have whatever comes in. So education is absolutely crucial. And my own view is perhaps what we should be doing is emphasizing more how to cope with problems, which people don't. And all of us in life will have medical, professional, financial, personal challenges or problems. Even Kate Middleton, Princess of Wales, who we think had everything, she sadly had cancer a year or so ago. So all of us have things, to cope with. And I think that's part of the human condition. And it makes you the person you are. Now, if I said to you, come to my house for dinner, and you can sit next to Bill or Ben, right? Bill has never been fired. He's never been dumped by his sexual partner's never been dumped at all. Really good looking, never had a day's illness, well off. There's him. Or you can sit next to Ben. Now, Ben has just come out of a long relationship. He was out of work for a while. He's just overcome a challenge with his health, and now he's writing a novel. Who would you rather sit next to? Who would be the more interesting individual?
Yeah, exactly.
And all of us are Ben in a tiny way. All of us have had our scars and our challenges, and that's what makes us the people we are.
Yeah, I love
and it makes us the people we are if we, instead of going into a heap, in a teary heap, we actually have learnt from those things and become an individual and a stronger person, more compassionate because of those things. So I think what is essential is young people, if we're designing the ideal education or the ideal world, it has to be interactive. You cannot be in isolation. You have to be down and dirty. You have to be there. You have to, from your birth, interact with other human beings in 3 dimensions. I think that's essential.
Can all humans be kind and compassionate? Or is it
I can think of 1 or 2 on the world stage that one might have a big question mark.
I know that, but can humanity and society actually survive if everyone is compassionate and kind?
Yeah, well, we don't really want a kind of, I'd say Pangloss, which is the Panglossian world, from Voltaire. That is one of the counter arguments to, why there wars in the world and why is there suffering. The opposite of that. Wouldn't we'd be missing out. We'd be missing out in a dimension of what it makes to be human, I think, if we lived in that kind of world. I think what I would like to do is encourage individuality and try and get people confident enough they don't have to follow the crowd, they don't have to follow fashions, and they certainly don't have to subscribe to dogma. What scares me more than anything are mass manipulation. So whether it's the Nuremberg rallies in Hitler's Germany, and I'll say this, when I saw some of the things in the Trump election, the rallies where people are mindlessly chanting. Even leaving politics aside, when I was a schoolgirl, I remember going to a concert and everyone was screaming at these pop stars, and I just couldn't do it. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I just thought it was a stupid thing to do. Why scream at people?
What is the price of being a contrarian?
The price is that you have sometimes oppositions, you have to criticism, you're sometimes wrong. Sometimes people laugh at you, but on the other hand, you can look yourself in the mirror and know that you're you. My mum used to say that. She said, if you're imitating someone else, you're always second rate. If you're yourself, you're magnificent.
We can go deep on this because actually individuality is also subject to the scars that you've picked up, maybe in this lifetime, but maybe from your parents or before. So it's because I feel like part of where we're going with this is building a world or shaping the world, because the world is being shaped and society is being shaped at such a fast rate right now. And the conversations that you have and I have with people are the conversations that are helping to shape it in one direction or another. So it's the question is, what does individuality look like?
Well, humanity's always been shaped, obviously, because we adapt to the environment.
But the environment's changing.
The environment's changing. And what scares me is mass manipulation. That really frightens me. Eloquent politicians leading, sharing crowds, or whether it's being on social media and fear of missing out, fear of not being the same as someone else. And that's the problem, because you have this paradox. On the one hand, everyone wants to conform and be approved of and be the same. On the other hand, you want to stand out, you want to be different, and you can't have both those things at once. And I think somehow the way one can encourage people to get the best out of themselves, my own view is, and perhaps this is very old-fashioned, is reading the classics, reading Shakespeare. That's all about, the ancients had it. It's all about human nature. It's all about how an individual copes with fate and with destiny and with people plotting against you and with things that happen to you that are not your fault, The more you read things like that about people in different eras and different cultures, then the broader your understanding, and for yourself as well, rather than just being completely self-centered. And I think another problem with this current trend is people becoming very solipsistic, very selfish. It's all about me. It's all about me, rather than thinking about general questions and big ideas. When I was young, we used to talk about politics all the time, socialism versus communism and so on, not just staring glossy-eyed at a screen. And I think that discussing the big ideas about what it means to be human and what kind of world we want, things like we're talking now, they are less encouraged or less frequent because people are distracted, or they look at their mobiles, or it's just easier to just, as you say, we're living in a answer-rich, question-poor world, whereas in the old days we used to be in a question-rich, answer-poor, where you'd have to work to get an answer. You'd have to go to the library. You'd have to look something up in a book. You'd have to ask people, You'd have to work to get an answer, Whereas now it's just easier there,
It's very interesting because it's like, what is better? And I think the world according to Susan, where individuality is championed and people have the opportunity, is great. And yet there are aspects of this modern age that have given us a lot of abundance and value as well. So it's like finding the answer is more difficult, but it's that access to information, if handled well, could create this idealistic.
But information isn't knowledge, Einstein said all knowledge comes from experience, not meaning you had to live things literally, but that you yourself had to slog it. You had to join up the dots. You had to find things out, It doesn't come instantly.
From a brain health perspective, talk us through that. How is our rewiring or plasticity being impacted by the fact that access to information is too easy, finding the answers is too easy right now?
Okay, so it means you don't make associations between things. So facts on their own are pretty boring if you think about it. Yeah. I don't know if you know Charles Dickens' Hard Times. There's someone called Gradgrind in there who says facts. Just teach people facts. That's all they need to know. And it's almost a parody about fact. Just have a fact. But what do you do with that fact? I mean, that's why people who are good at pub quizzes aren't winning the Nobel Prize. You know, it's because they might, or mastermind. You know, it's people that know facts. It's how you join up the facts, how one fact relates to another, that gives you an idea or something more abstracted that is interesting. Yeah. And I think if you're over dieting just on facts and learning the facts and can't see a framework for joining them up or getting something out of it, then pretty much you're pretty boring anyway if you just tell people facts. That's a very dull thing to be. But it's boring for you also. You know. So what? Yeah.
It's interesting because how we engage with information, and this is why I want to go deeper into this is like how are humans changing? It's an interesting.
Okay, I think they're becoming a bit like volatile 3-year-olds. If we're saying, that is to say, very self-centered, living in a literal world, a very weak sense of identity. Slightly adversarial, slightly confrontational.
Weak sense of identity. Tell us about that.
A weak sense of identity is rather like a small child doesn't have a strong identity. They're very much the passive recipient of their senses. They just respond to things and want things. I think that we are in danger of having a generation of people who are like that, who just live for the moment, have a short attention span, therefore don't really think about things through in terms of consequences, aren't informed by a particularly rich set of experiences in the past. They're just there in the moment. Really interesting study was done some time ago now, but it's really quite telling, of getting some young people just to sit still for 10 or 15 minutes. This is by someone called Wilson. It was published in Science in 2011. It's a long time ago. And they just had to sit there. And they couldn't bear it. After they'd rather give electric shocks themselves. Yeah. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
So I think what we need to do is to try and reverse that trend and to have a society where people constantly leeching off, who can't go into that inner world, that narrative that normally you cultivate as a child when you have the box turned into a castle. If you're in a world where you constantly need input from your computer, from your mobile, from whatever, then I think that is the most serious, because it means you don't have an inner narrative. You have an identity crisis, which is what we're seeing.
Let's go a bit deeper into your research in Alzheimer's and dementia as well. That what are the effects of social media and our technology on
dementia,
early onset as well?
Oh, okay, so early onset, there's very few. That's about 4 to 5% of people that have familial dementia, and even then the genetic link isn't a single gene, a single aberrant gene, it's just a tendency. So Alzheimer's disease is not it's not like Huntington's chorea, which is a genetic based disorder. It's not a strongly genetic disorder. There are genes involved out there in everything, but everyone is at risk of Alzheimer's. It's not as if you have a genetic, apart from a very small percentage, you have a slightly enhanced risk. So it's not a genetic issue. But it is something that I think it's interesting to know how social media might play a role. We certainly know that in older people, something called cognitive reserve is very important. That's to say, kind of money in the bank, as it works, experiences and mental efforts stored away in your head. And that's come if you're socializing with people. If you live alone, you don't socialize and your cognitive reserve is lower. Whereas if you are interacting, if you're still mobile and can dance and interact with people, it's been shown that you're more resilient to Alzheimer's because you have more offsetting that in the bank. So, of course, it's hard to link that generation who are prone to Alzheimer's with new media and social media and so on. But one might see that if social media is discouraging people from socializing, and if they're more on their own, and they're more anxious, that's a negative driver, anxiety and stress, then one might see that that's a factor. At the moment, there's no obvious clear link between those two things.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about, comparing brain scans of someone that is using social media far more than the other? Do you not see patterns or something you can see?
It depends what, you can do brain scans on people, but again, it depends what you're looking for. Brain scans will show you on a relatively slow timescale activity in the brain. They're very good for things like brain tumours and abnormalities and ongoing steady state issues. What they're not good for are moments of consciousness, because you're out by several orders of magnitude in terms of how the brain works compared to what you can image. So that's not really good. And also, if you see different bits of the brain lighting up, what actually does that mean? It means that different bits of the brain are lighting up. What those bits of the brain do, they're not mini brains. They don't have exclusive functions. They might participate in many different things in many different ways. So I think sometimes people read too much into brain scans, thinking it reveals some kind of phrenology, which you may be familiar with. That was in the old days when people thought bumps on the head corresponded to very sophisticated different characteristics of people.
Oh, okay.
And so my own view is brain scans are very, very good clinically. They're very helpful. In revealing subtle differences between people, I would be very cynical about exactly what you're seeing. Certainly you can do it, but what it means and what you're actually seeing, I would question.
AI.
Yes, inevitably. Yeah.
How do you see this playing out?
Okay, so I think we can separate it as two issues. One that has been neglected, and the one that I could speak to most, is what will it do to people? What kind of people, again, how's it going to affect people? And everyone is going on about how it's going to take jobs or not take jobs, and how wonderful society is going to be. But there's been very few issues addressing how it's going to make, are they going to make someone better or worse as a person? But let's leave that to one side, because no one's really done it. But I think we might be losing things. Certainly we're losing even more our grasp of what the truth is. And I think if we live in a world where, as we know, you or I could now be produced in AI, you could have the fake Julian and so on. That is quite frightening, because you don't know what's real and what's fake. Now, I know children are being trained to try and show the differences, but I think that technology will get, of course, even more proficient. And we're going to be in a world where, as in the past, the truth, what was truth and what wasn't true, was very easy. But now, what is the truth? How are we going to ascertain what is true, what is not true from what we see? And I think that's a very deep problem. The second is with reality generally. And there's two very scary cases that have come to the news. One was of this boy who was having an affair with his chatbot and killed himself as a result. And then, rather spooky, a lady in Japan who's married her chatbot. Isn't that sad? Strange. So I think this is speaking or showing us some of the extremes of how people might be with this. I think also people mistakenly think that AI has agency, which of course it doesn't. And that's the big difference with us, is that we can decide we want to do something, whereas AI is very good at learning and pattern recognition and so on, and answering questions. But it is not going to decide spontaneously to do something.
Not yet.
No. But why would it, or how could it? Because you need to have a drive to do that. And I've argued with someone recently, I don't think it could ever be conscious, because consciousness, as far as we know, and this is, of course, one of life's mysteries. I've written 2 books on it, so I can vouchsafe it's a mystery still, which requires the interface of the central nervous system, the immune system, and the endocrine system all working together in a body. And working non-algorithmically. Of course, one can imagine a machine, like you can imagine a unicorn, but I think as far as we know it, consciousness is a property of having central nervous systems interfaced in bodies. So I don't think the burden of proof would be on the AI proponent to say how it could happen or how they would bring it about. I don't see.
Because we don't
what happened.
We don't actually know what consciousness is.
That's why it interests me very much that increasingly, as I've become more religious, I have this feeling that somehow it's congruent with the soul. That the two are the great mysteries. If you think about it, the soul is something where people use the word all the time. Sometimes people don't believe in afterlife or God or anything, but they'll talk about soul food and getting to the soul. And I remember. Bush saying he'd seen into Putin's soul, which was quite an interesting concept. So we talk about it colloquially, and of course people of faith think it's something that will endure after death. But what is it? And what is this soul? And I think it's something that's the quintessence of us, more than our personality, more than our minds. It's something that's the utter subjectivity of us. And in my mind, in ways I've yet to work out, consciousness is also the great mystery. No one has the foggiest idea how it comes about. even though everyone would acknowledge it exists. Yeah. And I find that the two mysteries of the soul and God somehow link into consciousness in ways that I've yet to fathom.
I was recently listening to Shamil Chandaria lecture on consciousness and the amount of theories around consciousness, and do we need truly conscious AI for it to hold a caring role, especially in the setting of hospitals, let's say with general practitioners in the UK or physicians in the US. So a really quite abstract question to you is, do you think AI could be something divine? And what I mean by that is, we don't know. You mentioned AI won't become conscious, but we don't know what consciousness is. We don't know if we're even in, let's say, a real world now. We could be in a simulation.
Yeah.
So it's getting a bit abstract. But...
No, it's not. That reminds me of a Borges story. There's a South American writer called Borges who wrote about someone who has ended up being in someone else's dream and it all being a dream. It's quite an interesting concept. And of course, when I did philosophy at university, I was thinking the only thing I can rely on my own senses. I don't know if you're conscious or even exist. It's just, so of course one can go into those kind of rabbit holes. But I think in terms of AI and its power is a computational power. Whereas human beings use intuition and common sense, and AI doesn't use those things. And as Stuart Sutherland said as a psychologist ages ago, when people talked about conscious computers, he had a lovely saying. He said he'd believe a computer was conscious when it ran off with his wife.
As you said before.
Sadly, they did. Well, I think that speaks not so much to hormonal drives as to someone desperately needing a companion and feeling so insecure and perhaps so unsure of real reality that, and we know people can very easily attribute devices with agency or thoughts. My Fitbit, I can sometimes think it's a real person telling me not to do things or recording, even simple things like that.
There's a flip side to the AI argument, which is as AI takes over more and more of our day-to-day tasks and all that, it will free us up to tap back into...
To do what, exactly?
Our creative... Or just to be human, being creative beings. If we can, again, angle society in a way to say, look, I don't need to do all the washing up. I don't need to do all the whatever. I can do whatever I want to. But the question is, who will take over this big vacuum of time and space that is left?
Exactly. I was talking to an AI expert who said his little boy, who's 4, probably won't have to work ever. And I said, well, that's fine. So what's he going to do? And this notion of being creative, not everyone is necessarily an opera singer or a gifted musician. And we know that human talents vary. And I can speak for myself that there's no way I could ever be a singer, ever. So some talents you're born with, despite your environment. So you can't force someone to be creative. And we do, that's the whole point about being a human being. We all have different talents and skills. And I think the challenge and the best world in which I could is that everyone finds what they're best at doing. And it doesn't matter what it is, and there's no value or status attached to one thing over another. There's an old saying, do what you love and you'll never have to work again. And I'd like to see a world where people are doing what they love and they're good at. They're usually the one and the same thing. Being good at something and enjoying it usually are totally hand in hand. And the question is society take the effort to help people identify what that is. It can be perhaps sport, it can be something physical, it could be some kind of craft. It doesn't have to be creative. It could be some mathematics. It depends what it could be. Academic, not academic, but it's putting a premium on the individual and letting them develop to their full potential, whatever that is, without it being compared with one or the other and having certain status things attached to it and so on. That would be, for me, an ideal world of true individuals who respect individuality in others. That would be.
There's a saying which is don't follow your passion, follow your talent. But when you follow your talent, usually then it becomes a passion.
Well, I can't think of any example where you'd be good at something and not enjoy it. Alternatively, because you do it a lot, If you're enjoying something...
I think didn't really enjoy tennis at the end of his career, but it's a good point. And actually, talking about another sportsman, which is interesting, Rory McIlroy, the golfer, I might be misquoting him there, but so we'll check it. But said that he's very lucky that in 2020 or whenever he said the quote, swinging a stick would get him millions of
pounds.
dollars a year and lots of fans, but doing that 200 years ago wouldn't have got him anywhere. So it's also creating a world where, what are our drivers? It's going back to what it means to be human. Is it being the person that everyone looks at and being driven by having the crowds there, or is it driven by something? It goes back to identity and all this, and we're so far removed from what identity means. I actually, in this very room, asked a previous guest of mine, what does it mean to be British in 2025? And that's something that I think it's changing quite a bit as well. But... Are
you asking me that question or about identity?
The first one, there's two questions there.
About identity. Well, I did write a book on identity sometime and how we define our identity, because you have two. You can have a collective identity, like being British, like being a man or being a woman or a member of a football team or a choir. Or one has a collective identity in many different ways, and we have lots of different identities in that sense. Then you have your individual identity of who you are. But that again can vary according to your environment, which is why I think the soul is different from identity. I think the soul is a singular thing, and that doesn't change. It's your soul. Identities can change and shift and do over the years. That doesn't mean to say they're in any way not important. I think we're more comfortable probably talking about identity than talking about the soul.
But how do we then create a world where, because going back to the truth argument with AI and blurring the truth, and I think this is the big question, because the world is going to change so much, and the people changing the world are becoming fewer and fewer.
Well, there was someone called James Martin, sadly now dead, who was a great thinker and technologist. And he said, we shouldn't ask what's going to happen in the world. We should ask how we're going to change the world, how we're going to do it. We can't just sit back and let someone else do it. Why don't we have a go? In our little ways, So we should be asking, how can we shape the world? But in order to answer that question, you have to know what would be your ideal. And that's what gets me. A lot of people know what they don't want and what's bad. But it's much harder to be positive and say, well, actually, I think this is what this is what we should be aiming for, these kind of skills in society, this kind of government, this type of lifestyle, And we are at a great privileged time when we can ask those questions in a way that previous centuries could not, And certainly in the Western world. We have so-called democracy, well, at least for the moment, who knows how long that will last, but we have democracy. So we have the ability, we have the freedom to exercise our ideas, rather than just passively waiting for someone else to do it.
As a baroness who sits in the House of Lords, how do you think someone in the UK or the US could best leverage their voice to make a difference?
Okay, not on social media necessarily. I know that's the obvious... depends what their skills and their talents are and how old they are and what stage they're at, I think writing books, if one is... not everyone's going to write a book, obviously, writing plays. I know a lady who's in her 70s whose husband died, and she's now taken to writing plays and put them on locally and so on. So I think you can change... Every journey starts with a simple step. You don't have to change the global world, but within your orbit, depending on how you are, you can change a little bit how your society, your workplace changes. You can start with that possibly.
But I find social media is the place now. You have the largest microphone.
Well, I suppose you can do that, but on the other hand, we've just said that it is a megaphone rather than, and that you're influencing mass people. I'd like to think that the strongest influence is the way you can exert things as an individual with other individuals, as role models. There used to be a slogan for recruiting teachers: everyone remembers a good teacher. And I'm sure you can remember, Julian, what was your favourite subject at school? What was your favourite subject? I bet it was the teacher that did it.
Definitely.
It's personal things. That's how you influence people most. Yes, of course you can go on social media as long as you've got something interesting to say. But very sadly, with these influencers and so on, I think that actually content.
I'm laughing because I've got a small growing influence.
You're an influencer. What are you influencing people to do?
A lot of it is around mindset. It's around mindset and consciousness. And
but what that is telling them to go and find out about those things. Think about those things.
You've said the genie is out of the bottle when it comes to AI and technology. And we can't stop it, but we can design better systems. What do those better systems look like?
what we can do, rather than reverse it, we can, I don't use that trump because I use that word, but one can override it. For example, I used to smoke a long, long time ago, yeah? And everyone told me I shouldn't smoke and I should stop smoking. And it wasn't until I bought a book that instead of preaching at me, saying stop smoking or don't do this, it was just not, I saying, imagine a world where you have white teeth, and imagine a world where you have a lot more money, and imagine a world where you can smell flowers. And it was this positive new me, yeah, as opposed to the negative of just not doing something. So I would say it's not so much how can we suppress or stop this cyber world, but surely there's something much more fun we could do instead. Yeah? And a dad wrote to me once saying, his kids were sort of using technology, just sort of stuck indoors, and he finally got them out for a bike ride. And as they were cycling up and down some slope, they started giggling spontaneously. You know, sometimes you just giggle. And he said, that is music to the ears of a parent. I never hear that noise when they're on the computer. Yeah? So it's more effort, though. It's more, certainly for parents. You know, of course, you have to free up the time. It might cost money. You have to, it's easier to just give someone an iPad. But I think if we can show people how much more fun it is to have face-to-face interactions. Well, look at it. After the COVID, people know this. You know, if the screen world was such a wonderful place, why didn't one go nuts when the COVID restrictions were lifted? You know, as human beings need to live. And I think we must start to think of scenarios, of worlds, of education systems that, yes, use these things, but they're a means to an end. They're not an end in themselves. At the moment, they're an end in themselves, and that's the sinister aspect. And what we need to do is decide what kind of qualities we want, and then work at ways in which we can devise systems, relationships, scenarios that actually encourage those things.
So much around mental health is, and again, I'm not a neuroscientist or a therapist to say this, but you are, so you can correct me here, is feeling into your emotions, so feeling into the pain that you might be suffering. And the problem with the device, it just completely allows you to disconnect with the trauma or whatever that you're feeling on a day-to-day basis. We pick up little knocks every single day, however small or large. So it's, do you think that's also
well, it's the tactile sense, certainly, and feeling pain. Yes, of course, those things are part of life. And if you are sanitized, even more sort of simple, really, is even face-to-face interaction. If you are not, you have to learn how to have a conversation. You learn to interpret body language subconsciously. You look someone in the eye. Yeah. Now, if you haven't rehearsed those things, you're not going to be good at them, which means they'll be even more aversive than they might be otherwise. So you'll avoid doing them. I mean, I've heard of friends who text each other rather than talk to each other. Yeah, it's just so sad. And then we're surprised at the rise in mental health and the cyberbullying and all the rest of it.
I know not everyone was like this, but post-COVID, I remember I had to almost relearn some or get back up to speed with
case
how
proven.
So
you're not born being able to communicate brilliantly with other people. You have to learn. And body language is kind of nature's handbrake. Yeah. That if someone is looking away and folding their arms, then you're not going to open up. Yeah. So you're not making yourself vulnerable. That constraint doesn't apply on social media. So you make yourself vulnerable, and then look what happens. Yeah.
Susan, I want to go into your crystal ball.
Yeah.
What does the world look like in 2030?
If I rule the world.
Your predictions.
2030 is not far away.
It's not far away anymore. I've been asking it since the beginning of the year, and it feels at the end of this year, it's getting closer.
Okay, so let's start with the good news. I think that there will be a realistic advance in treating Alzheimer's. I really think that, because I'm doing it, and I know that, so I can say an advance, not cure. But I hope eventually, perhaps not within the next 4 years, but I hope it will be like I used to say to my mum, was TB ever a problem? Was polio ever a problem? Wow. It wouldn't be lovely if your grandchildren said to you, Julian, was it ever a problem? Wow. Granddad, was it ever a problem? So I think we are within sights of that, with appropriate funding and a fair wind. That's something that could be realistic.
So, by 2030 that we'll have treatments?
We could have a treatment, yeah. Wow. Well, not necessarily a drug. You could have a biomarker, that's to say a diagnostic test that allows you to take the treatment earlier than it is now. I think that's possible. I think there might be a backlash. And what I found interesting is the rise of vinyl records, for example, and the slow food movement. And I think people might start to feel that AI is not delivering, it's not making them happy, it's not giving them the satisfaction, that there is some inner need that they have that's not being fulfilled by doing things quickly. And there may be some kind of backlash, a rise in the digital detox, a rise in all these new age ways of trying to recover one's identity and so on. I think there'll be that. Sadly, I think society is veering to a more self-centered society with demise of family units and people more concerned about themselves. I'm talking here about the West. I can't talk about other cultures, of course, or in the global South or anything. I'm talking about our society. And I think it's going to be a society that is more anxious, not least because of global warming, which I'm not an expert on, but everyone knows, apart from Donald Trump, who thinks it's a hoax, is actually going to be a very serious problem. And the geopolitical situation, which is much more uncertain and troubling than when I was growing up. Nowadays, there's this sort of low-grade anxiety about it all, I think, about global warming and about world peace and what's happening and the conflicts. Whereas when I was growing up, it was the Cold War and that was it. It was just, Do
you think part of that anxiety is just the overabundance of flashing things telling you?
I think the anxiety might be because one hasn't been given the equipment, the education to cope with it and analyse it and understand it. You're just there, constantly bombarded with things, and you're very much at the mercy of the media and how they manipulate you. So I think, it might be that the next generation is a more anxious generation. And a less thoughtful generation, and perhaps one has a kind of elite. I hate to say that, that are the masters of the universe who manipulate people, and you have this slightly childlike, anxious mass of people.
Do you think there is, and this can veer on conspiracy theory, but the ability of social media to control? It's just it's very clear, and it's actually an amazing tool for a totalitarian state.
Totally, it is. Well, even influencers. So, in fact, by definition, the fact they can influence people. I find that quite
the tools have
frightening.
changed. There's always been the people wanting. And I'm not again. I'm not saying being an influencer is a bad thing at all. I think it's just having a platform, but. You've mentioned that we can change the world for better, but people have to step up.
They have to want
these
it.
Tools become more centralized, and just one ring to rule them all, one tool to rule them all at this point.
No, I think if you're saying how can you get people to be aware and empowered, that comes with education. It comes with the family, the parents, the people that are watching this. You start with that.
Human cognition.
Yeah. Don't look so worried about it.
What could a human look like by 2050?
Probably will be more homogenous. I don't know of any driver at the moment that promotes people to stand up and say, actually, I disagree, and everyone clap them. I think at the moment there is this, because that comes from a lack of confidence. You want to be one of the crowd. You want to be one of and I think that at the moment, the way society is going, that there's all these tendencies to have the followers and so on, and to have the appeasement of the friends, endless people. I think that probably, I don't know if we will see people as ruggedly individual as we have in the past.
Singularity.
Yes.
This event that people anticipate, Ray Kurzweil said will happen in 2045. Some people think it's earlier. Do you think AI could eventually be our greatest
Absolutely
friend?
not. No, because it's very simple. Because we don't work algorithmically and computational. And Kurzweil makes a mistaken assumption that the brain works algorithmically. It doesn't. It doesn't work like that. So it's a completely different system. It doesn't work computationally. So they do what they do, the systems, and we do what we do.
But could AI potentially guide humanity from the brink?
Guide it from the brink.
Yeah.
As opposed to killing them, but it's because there's robots around the house who decided to knock you off.
Sure. But exactly, because that's
AI is the result of learning from things. It's not in and of itself an initiator. Yeah. It doesn't have emotions.
But it can recognize, through pattern recognition, say, this happened in between 1939 and 1945 because of X, Y, and Z. Times, however many more data
So it can
points
suddenly
has.
say Putin or something is putting the world in danger. Yeah.
I'm just hypothetically saying, a very, very advanced AI in 10, 15, 20 years could say that humanity is at its finest when it's thinking thinking in an imaginative way and being creative and all that.
It would have to be programmed to do that, of course. Its AI is not going to decide that this is what it wants. Yeah, that's what, because there's alternatives. Yeah, one can imagine, yes, very powerful systems recognizing patterns, but I can't quite see how it might. So you're saying it's going to suddenly say, we're on the brink, humanity, pull back, because AI have noticed certain patterns are emerging. Well, we're on the brink already, so I think that,
But I think that's the question. Yeah. It's like how, and I had the fortune of speaking to or interviewing the Undersecretary of NIST at the time, Laurie Locasio, and she was talking a lot about AI bias and how AI will always be biased, no matter how hard you try. It's dependent on the people in the room that are trying to be as unbiased as possible, but they are.
But they're biased also,
because they are from X and Y background. Sure. But I think as these tools become more and more powerful and get centralized in fewer and fewer places, I wonder.
Well, what I fear is not so much AI, but the people that are operating the AI.
Sure.
They're the ones that we should be worried about, because they're the ones that have feelings. You can imagine with the white cat stroking with the signet rings. Hello, Mr. Bond. The evil villain of the Bond movies with the cat. Yeah.
One last question to leave on a positive note, as always. Yeah. What advice could you give to our listeners today, just to take a little takeaway to thrive? Well,
it would be a big suggestion, which is be yourself. Be yourself and be proud to be whatever you are, and don't try and copy other people, and respect that in others as well, And if you're yourself, and you stand out, then people might like you, they might not like you, but tough, they'll respect you for sure. Just be yourself and have fun.
Susan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian.